What happens when royalty walks onto a late-night set, thinking the crown still matters, only to discover that in America, respect is earned, not inherited? In just 36 seconds, one comment would shatter any illusion of diplomatic immunity and turn a simple interview into the most jaw-dropping ejection in television history. The studio lights were hot that evening. Greg Gutfeld sat behind his desk, that familiar smirk playing at the corners of his mouth as he prepared to welcome his next guest. The audience buzzed with anticipation. This was going to be interesting. Prince Harry, the royal who'd traded Buckingham Palace for Hollywood Hills, was about to sit down for what everyone assumed would be a friendly chat. But friendly was the last thing this was going to be. Harry walked out to polite applause, waving to the crowd like he was greeting subjects rather than an American television audience. He settled into the guest chair with an air of casual superiority, crossing his legs and adjusting his jacket like he was doing everyone a favor just by showing up. "Welcome to the show," Gutfeld said, his tone warm but professional. "Thanks for joining us tonight." "Happy to be here," Harry replied, though his expression suggested otherwise. There was something in his eyes, a kind of restless irritation, like he was already somewhere else in his mind. Gutfeld started with the softballs, asked about his new life in California, his various projects, the usual talk show fodder. Harry's answers were clipped, distracted. He kept checking his watch, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed by the host or the audience. "You seem like you've got somewhere else to be," Gutfeld observed, keeping his tone light. No, Harry said, waving a hand dismissively. "Just used to a different pace, I suppose. British television has a certain refinement to it." The audience went quiet. That uncomfortable kind of quiet where everyone knows something awkward just happened, but nobody wants to acknowledge it yet. Gutfeld's smile didn't waver. "Well, we try to keep things moving here. Attention spans being what they are in America." "Yes, I've noticed that," Harry said, and there was no mistaking the condescension in his voice now. "Everything is so rapid fire here. No time for actual depth or substance." "Depth and substance," Gutfeld repeated, leaning back in his chair. "That's interesting coming from someone who's spent the last few years doing tell-all interviews." A few nervous laughs rippled through the crowd. Harry's jaw tightened. "Those interviews were about speaking my truth," he said, his voice taking on an edge. "Something I imagine might be a foreign concept on a show like this." "A show like this," Gutfeld echoed. "You want to elaborate on that?" "I just mean," Harry continued, seemingly unable to stop himself now, "that American media tends to prioritize entertainment over enlightenment. It's all spectacle, isn't it? No real journalism. No real conversation." The audience was dead silent now. Gutfeld set down his pen, folded his hands on the desk. "So you came on an American entertainment show to tell us that American entertainment shows have no value," he said slowly. "That's an interesting strategy." "I'm simply making an observation," Harry said. "Back home, interviews are conducted with a certain level of decorum. Here, it feels more like a circus." "And you're what, the ringmaster?" Gutfeld asked. "Or just another clown?" The audience gasped. Harry's face went red. "Excuse me?" he said, his voice rising. "You heard me," Gutfeld said, his tone still calm, but with steel underneath. "You come on my show, insult my country's media, insult my audience's intelligence, and somehow you're the victim here?" "I never said I was a victim," Harry snapped. "I'm simply pointing out the obvious differences in quality between..." "Between what?" Gutfeld interrupted. "Between you and everyone else in the room? Because that's what this sounds like. You sitting there in your designer jacket, looking at your watch every 30 seconds like we're wasting your precious time." "If you'd let me finish my sentences," Harry said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger, "perhaps we could have an actual adult conversation." "An adult conversation," Gutfeld repeated. "Okay, Let's have one. What exactly did you think was going to happen tonight? You thought you'd come here, talk down to everyone, and we'd all just be grateful for the royal presence? That's not what I'm doing, Harry protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Really? Because from where I'm sitting, that's exactly what you're doing. You've been here less than 10 minutes, and you've managed to insult our media, our culture, and our intelligence. That's actually impressive in a terrible kind of way. Harry stood up suddenly, his chair scraping against the floor. I don't have to sit here and listen to this. You're absolutely right, Gutfeld said, standing as well. You don't. In fact, I'm not sure why you're still here. What's that supposed to mean? Harry demanded. It means, Gutfeld said, his voice level and clear, that if you have so little respect for this show, this audience, and this format, then maybe you should leave. Are you seriously? Harry started, then stopped, his mouth hanging open in disbelief. Are you kicking me off your show? I'm giving you the opportunity to make a dignified exit, Gutfeld said. Though based on the last 10 minutes, I'm not sure you know what dignity looks like. The audience was frozen. Cameras captured every second. Harry's face cycled through emotions. Shock, anger, humiliation. This is absurd, he finally said. I came here as a courtesy. A courtesy, Gutfeld laughed, but there was no humor in it. You came here to promote whatever project you're hawking this week. Let's not pretend this was some generous act of royal benevolence. I've done interviews all over the world, Harry said, his voice shaking now. Never have I been treated with such disrespect. Respect is a two-way street, Gutfeld shot back. You want to be treated with respect? Try showing some first. You can't walk into someone's house, insult everything about it, and then act shocked when you're asked to leave. Your house? Harry said, his voice dripping with disdain. This is a television studio, not a house. It's my show, Gutfeld said firmly. My name on it. My rules. And rule number 1 is you don't get to come here and treat people like they're beneath you. Harry opened his mouth to respond, then closed it. He looked out at the audience, as if expecting them to come to his defense. They stared back in silence. You know what your problem is? Gutfeld continued, and now there was something almost sad in his voice. You've spent your whole life being told you're special, that you matter more than other people just because of who your family is. And maybe that works in your world, but here, you're just another guest who couldn't show basic respect. I don't need to listen to a lecture from you, Harry said, but the fight was leaving his voice. Then don't, Gutfeld said simply. The door's right there. For a long moment, nobody moved. The tension in the studio was thick enough to cut. Harry stood there, clearly torn between his pride and the growing realization that he'd badly miscalculated. Fine, he finally said, his voice tight. I'll leave. But this whole thing, it just proves my point about American television. Does it? Gutfeld asked. Because from where I'm standing, it proves that nobody, not even a prince, gets to act like an entitled jerk on my show. That's not an American thing. That's a basic human decency thing. Harry turned to walk off set, but Gutfeld wasn't done. And Harry, he called out. The prince stopped, turned back. Next time you want to do an interview, Gutfeld said, maybe try actually wanting to be there. Harry's face flushed red again. He opened his mouth, closed it, then turned and walked off set without another word. The audience sat in stunned silence for a beat, then erupted. Some were clapping, some were just making noise, processing what they'd just witnessed. Gutfeld sat back down at his desk, straightened his papers, and looked directly into the camera. Well, he said, that familiar smirk returning. That was something. The audience laughed, the tension finally breaking. But there was an undercurrent of shock still running through the room. Nobody had expected the interview to go that way. Nobody had expected a prince to get kicked off a late-night talk show. You know, Gutfeld continued, settling back into his host persona. I've had a lot of guests on this show. Politicians, actors, athletes, all kinds of people. And here's what I've learned. It doesn't matter who you are or where you come from. If you can't show basic respect for the people around you, you don't belong here. The audience applauded. It wasn't just about Harry anymore. It was bigger than that. We've all met people like that, Gutfeld went on. People who think the rules don't apply to them. Who think their title, or their money, or their famous last name means they get to treat others like they're invisible. And you know what? They're exhausting. More applause. People were nodding along. Here's the thing about America, Gutfeld said, his voice taking on a more serious tone. We don't care about your bloodline. We don't care who your parents were, or what palace you grew up in. What we care about is how you treat people. Can you look someone in the eye and talk to them like they're human? Can you show up somewhere and not act like everyone should be grateful you're breathing their air? He paused, letting the words sink in. Apparently, for some people, that's too much to ask. The cameras had caught everything. Harry's dismissive attitude, his repeated watch checking, the casual insults disguised as observations, and then the confrontation, the escalation, the walk-off. It was all there, recorded for posterity. I want to be clear about something, Gutfeld said, looking directly into the camera again. I didn't want that to happen. I would have loved to have had a real conversation tonight. But you can't have a conversation with someone who thinks they're above having one. The audience was quiet now, listening. When someone sits in that chair, Gutfeld gestured to the empty guest seat, I treat them with respect. I listen to what they have to say. I might disagree. I might challenge them. But I treat them like they're worth listening to. All I ask is the same in return. That's not a high bar. He shook his head, a rueful smile on his face. But some people can't clear it. Some people are so wrapped up in their own sense of importance that they forget how to be decent to others. And when that happens, when someone shows you who they really are, you have to believe them. The show had to go on. Gutfeld moved into his next segment, but the energy in the room had shifted. Something significant had happened. A line had been drawn. The message had been sent. Backstage, production staff were scrambling. This wasn't in the script. This wasn't planned. A guest walking off, or more accurately, being kicked off, in the middle of an interview. It was unprecedented. But back in the studio, Gutfeld was already moving forward. That was his skill, his strength, the ability to handle chaos and make it look easy, the ability to stand his ground and not back down, even when facing royalty. You know what I love about this country, he said, segueing into his next topic, but still clearly referencing what had just happened. We decided a long time ago that we weren't going to bow to anyone, that we weren't going to treat people as better or worse based on their birth. And yeah, we mess that up sometimes. We're human, but the principle is sound. The audience cheered. They understood what he was really saying. This wasn't just about a bad interview. It was about values, about what matters and what doesn't. Titles don't impress us, Gutfeld continued. Money doesn't impress us. What impresses us is character, is kindness, is treating the person serving your coffee with the same respect you'd treat a CEO. That's what matters. He was on a roll now, and the audience was with him. And if you can't do that, if you can't manage that basic level of human decency, then I don't care if you're a prince or a pauper. You don't get a pass. Not here. Not on this show. The applause was thunderous now. People were standing. They weren't just supporting Gutfeld anymore. They were supporting the principle, the idea that nobody is above basic respect. We're going to take a quick break, Gutfeld said, and when we come back, we'll talk to someone who actually wants to be here. The cameras cut, the lights dimmed slightly, and for a moment Gutfeld sat there, processing. His producers rushed over, checking if he was okay, asking if he needed anything. He waved them off with a smile. "I'm fine," he said. "That was just, wow." But he wasn't shaken. If anything, he seemed energized. He'd stood his ground. He'd refused to let someone treat his show, his audience, his country with contempt. And he'd done it without losing his cool, without stooping to Harry's level. That was the key. Gutfeld hadn't yelled, hadn't insulted, had simply stated facts and drawn a line. Harry had crossed that line repeatedly, and when called out, had chosen to leave rather than apologize or adjust his behavior. The break ended. The show resumed. Gutfeld welcomed his next guest with genuine warmth, and the interview went smoothly. Professional, engaging, respectful on both sides. The way it was supposed to be. But everyone watching knew what the real story was. The interview that ended early. The prince who couldn't handle being treated like everyone else. The host who refused to back down. As the show wrapped up, Gutfeld addressed the camera one final time. "Thanks for watching tonight," he said. "I know that got a little intense there for a minute, but sometimes you have to stand up for what you believe in. And I believe that everyone who sits in that chair deserves respect, and everyone who sits in that chair owes respect. When those things are in balance, we can have great conversations. When they're not, well, you saw what happens." He smiled, that trademark Gutfeld smile that said he knew exactly what he'd done and didn't regret it for a second. "Good night, everybody. See you tomorrow." The credits rolled. The audience filed out, buzzing with excitement and disbelief. The crew started breaking down the set, and somewhere, Prince Harry was probably regretting every choice that had led him to that chair on that night. Because in the end, it didn't matter that he was royalty. It didn't matter that he'd grown up in palaces or that his grandmother had been a queen. What mattered was how he'd treated people, and on that count, he'd failed spectacularly. Gutfeld had given him every opportunity to course correct, every chance to dial back the arrogance and have a real conversation. But Harry had chosen differently, had doubled down on the dismissiveness, the superiority, the contempt, and Gutfeld had simply shown him the door. It was a moment that would be replayed and analyzed and debated for days, weeks, maybe longer. People would take sides. Some would say Gutfeld was too harsh, too quick to kick off a guest. Others would say he'd done exactly what needed to be done, that he'd stood up for himself and his audience and his values. But in that moment, in that studio, with those cameras rolling and that audience watching, it had been clear who was in the right. Gutfeld had been professional, patient, and clear. Harry had been dismissive, insulting, and entitled. The contrast couldn't have been starker. The host who'd built his show through hard work and talent, facing down the prince who'd been born into privilege and seemed to think that was enough. It wasn't enough. It had never been enough. And on that night, in that moment, the whole world got to see exactly what happens when someone confuses a title with actual worth. Gutfeld had taught a masterclass in standing your ground, in knowing your value and not letting anyone diminish it, in treating people with respect but demanding it in return. Harry, for his part, had revealed something fundamental about himself, that despite all the talk of wanting to be normal, of wanting to be treated like everyone else, he still expected special treatment, still thought the rules didn't quite apply to him. The audience had seen it. The viewers at home had seen it. And most importantly, Gutfeld had seen it and refused to play along. Because at the end of the day, respect isn't about titles or birthright. It's about how you treat people. And on that score, there had been only one person in that studio who'd understood the assignment. It wasn't the prince. The interview that was supposed to be a friendly chat had become something else entirely. A cultural moment, a statement, a line drawn in the sand about what's acceptable and what's not. And through it all, Gutfeld had remained calm, clear, and unwavering. He'd given Harry every chance to be better, and when those chances were squandered, he'd done what needed to be done. He'd shown the prince the door and reminded everyone watching that in America, nobody is above basic human decency. Not even royalty.